Hello, Internet. I'm Batman! So, welcome to 75 years of Batman. They're putting on quite a thing. You can go buy a ton of digital comics. They're handing out this, which you guys should totally pick up. There's a lot of good stuff in here, if nothing else, some Murphy art, so. And, it's all good. More comics. So yeah, this reprints the first, the Detective Comics 27 from back when, and it's crazy because, Bill Finger's on that too, which was a lesson for me I didn't know, and so, if you haven't read that, read it. It's history. And apparently a big part of American history, one of the longest running, most prolific parts of the American myth is here. Like, that's something, and they have this other little kind of play on the original comic, if it was a more modern take, is kind of what I'm guessing. The Scott Snyder, Sean Murphy crazy Bat Legacy thing in the back that's just crazy and fun. For them to make this something to get you excited is awesome. So there's that today. I found this recently, and it kind of speaks to a little bit more of the history. It's this comics interview, which used to be a thing. I wish I'd get my hands on more of this stuff. This was a crazy thing, because in here, Frank Miller's Dark Knight, this came out when, that Dark Knight comic everyone talks about was coming out, and they're talking to him about that and his process and stuff. And then they're talking with Fred Finger, Bill Finger's son. There's a lot of crazy just top quotes in here, because they kind of, like in any magazine, they pull out quotes like, Kane and my father came up with Batman. My father developed the history. When Bill died, DC wasn't interested. Two-Face came out of Jekyll and Hyde. Kane had the final say, but he wasn't doing much. I was thrown out of the DC offices. The last years he lived in dreadful hotels. He wrote the screenplay of The Green Slime. And my father was just beaten. And then they moved to talking to Bob Kane in this. I'm now working on a Batman movie. Remember the fervor and all that? For me, it's hard to remember because I wasn't born. But that idea of when that initial big Batman movie came out, that was huge. That was a big thing. And we're talking past, obviously, the Adam West stuff. Again, Bob Kane. Eisner and I went to school together. I never did approve of ghost artists on Batman. It didn't look like Bob Kane. Batman ran a year when Robin was introduced. I think that's huge. Jerry Robinson thinks he's God's gift. Hugh Hefner inspired the Batman TV show. Adam West would love to play Batman today, but they want him a little bit younger. DC gave me a lifetime contract. And then they talked to Jerry Robertson. I remember when I came up with the Joker. Bob Kane wanted to call Batman's sidekick Mercury. I said, let's call him Robin. Finger deserves a large share of the credit. I used to erase Bob Kane's backgrounds and put my own in, big moons and shadows. Wow. And then they move on to, Frank Miller. Batman only works as a character if the world's a malevolent, frightening place. Superman and Batman have been enemies for decades. They've never liked each other. There's not enough real sex going on. Hill Blues is lazy and slow. I can't stand heroes who snivel and whine. Bruce Wayne is Batman's host body. Bruce died when he was 5 years old. Daredevil is small time next to Batman. Alfred is the nastiest son of a bitch. And then they talk to Burt Ward, and it's more crazy stuff. And it's just that's just a weird snapshot of years ago and how big Batman was and how it's still coming up. And that's crazy. And then let's fast forward to something that's more relevant to now, that I've been reading recently, and I've been catching up, and I want to do a separate video on this soon, but Grant Morrison's run on Batman. is crazy. I mean, just the idea that Batman has a son, which seems like such an obvious thing to do, took so long to really come around to that, partially because of Robins and the Wards and all that. But the bigger thing about Morrison's run, in the sense of it being Batman, is in order for it to function, you have to look at it as a piece of fiction in which there's an artifice set of rules around Batman and his enemies and whatnot, saying that the idea that it is a Batman comic means that there are certain expected expectations. I think it's kind of false because of the way so many people look at Morrison and consider the weaker part of his comics the way he wrote Batman. But the fact that he approached it even from that way, and that half of it really sold and sung and you don't really even think about, is insane. Like, in his sense, if Batman is in costume and is himself fully, he's not beatable. He's invincible. That's crazy. That's not like a thing that's written in or something. Like, that's just what he considers to be an assumed rule of a Batman comic. Like, that's basically saying Batman comics are their own genre because they have these tropes and expectations and all that on them. Not because it's a superhero comic, because it's a Batman comic. And that speaks to how large the character is, and not just in a multimedia sense or whatever, a certain relative amount of popularity, but as far as staying power and actual literal presence. It's amazing that you can look at a character like that, and going from there, we subvert and play with that expectation, and that's nuts. And now we're in Snyder's era, past Morrison, though I will say Morrison's run still is probably the biggest, heaviest direct influence onto most of what's going through Batman currently. So this week we have Batman Eternal 16. I mean, think about it, crazy. There's a Batman weekly book atop everything else, and it's one of the best things they're putting out. This one isn't so much on Batman as much as Batwing and Red Robin, speaking to the larger pantheon of Bat characters, but crazy. And a character that's supposed to be a crime fighter, we're dealing with technological and mystical elements, and because the mythos has grown so much, it fits. That's kind of a feat when you kind of pull back and realize how many characters have grown to that point. And a large part of that is because Batman's mired in the DC universe. I don't think that was the case as such before Batman became more part of, say, the Justice League and kind of got thrown in with a bunch of other characters, and those walls kind of started breaking down, but interesting nonetheless. Then we move to Batman and Robin, which is Batman and Robin once again, 33, which is playing hugely to what I'm talking about. This is kind of a shade of Batman you don't see so often. He's kind of vulnerable. There's a lot of lines in here. At one part in particular, he's talking to Superman and looking up at Superman flying and says, "Come down here, my neck's starting to hurt." It's kind of a... I know it's small, but it's kind of a vulnerable-ish kind of... and not weak, but fleshy, mortal sort of stance, and that's something they're trying to take with this, and that's a big point of this book, is that he stands among gods, and it's this character, and that's a big part of the appeal of Batman, is people see him, despite literary plot shield and whatnot, all that, they see him as a man among gods. He doesn't have powers, and that's what makes him so interesting. I've always viewed him as kind of the penultimate superhero in a lot of ways. He does have a lot of powers. I mean, he's considered to be the world's greatest detective, one of the world's greatest martial artists, a top-tier chemist, top-tier tracker, super handy with computers, one of the world's top drivers without question, able to handle any number of dealings, and ironically is a amazingly good shot for someone who's sworn off guns, which is not a skill you just pick up overnight. it's just an interesting thing, and so you get so many different shades of the character throughout the years that if you take the starchest one from the starchest one, they're almost completely different. I mean, if you look at All-Star Batman, compare it to Batman 66, the Adam West thing, that's so different, but it's still all Batman. So that's kind of nuts. Then, because it's worth celebrating all on its own, 0 years over! Hooray! And this issue is fun, though it's a little annoying that it's, the third, fourth, $5 issue in 0 year on top of the fact that it was a year-long ordeal to get through. A bit much. But this issue is really fun. It plays to a little bit more of a side of an origin of Batman we haven't seen before that I think is a little more interesting. In a way, it makes Batman more emotionally vulnerable again and kind of puts it to a place that I think is maybe a little bit more relatable today at the end. And then what's really crazy and something to talk about with the greater bit of Batman is the mythos. Here we get an end of what's a really cool Riddler comic. The earlier ones, I don't know, but this one was fun with the Riddler and totally like a contrived thing where Batman has to answer riddles to advance to deal with it. And it's fun when you think about Batman. I mean, as cool of a character as he can be, what really sets Batman apart are his villains, which he has the greatest rogues gallery of any superhero. I mean, the Joker, the Riddler, Two-Face, Ra's al Ghul, Man-Bats, and just almost anything from the DC universe. I mean, some of his villains get their own series. Deadshot, Harley Quinn, like, just great characters to match him up against, and that's what makes the struggle so much greater, is that the characters on the other side are, if not more so, just as interesting. And I just think that's another really cool idea. So, if you're not as familiar with some of Batman, there's a lot of great collections on sale on Comixology for the better part of a week, even out from now. Most issues of Batman-related stuff that you can think of are $1 right now per issue, which for a digital comic may not be so great, but if there's a few issues you've been looking for that you just want to read, might be cool. But, oh, and on that, there's one in particular, Gotham by Gaslight, which is a whole Elseworlds thing, which is really cool. A lot of Elseworlds is Batman, and just taking the rough idea of Batman, putting in different things. Gaslight being the idea of more of a Sherlock Holmes, where he needs to take out Jack the Ripper, and Batman's set in that old England sense, and is kind of has this steampunk thing going on. There's a bunch of other great ones. But what's really notable on Comixology right now is they have a few collections of Batman that are super cheap. Each of these are $3. I'm just going to read this off. There's Year One, The Long Halloween, Arkham Asylum, Killing Joke, The Complete Hush, Batman's Son, which I held up earlier, The Black Mirror, Volume 1 of the New 52, Court of Owls, Batman Earth 1, and The Dark Knight Returns. And a lot of those, on top of being great Batman stories, some of those are some of the most groundbreaking, noteworthy graphic collections of especially American comics, but really comic book history. And some of them just, I mean, are really well-renowned, like, literary pieces that most everyone has read that are almost cultural touchstones even. So say what you will, but Batman Year One is huge and widely loved by everyone for a lot of different reasons, and there's a lot to look into in that book, and it's a really incredible take. And I mean, Year Zero is finished now, but I mean, how they were trying to tackle against Year One, I think is, in a way, even looking at it now, trivial, because it's Batman Year One. You can't fight that anymore. Like, that is the origin of Batman, like, no matter how you slice it. The Long Halloween is personally one of my favorite Batman stories. It's a great murder mystery. It touches on a lot of the villains. It's just really a great work. And it's really interesting because for a lot of people, when they look at the artwork at first, including me, Tim Sale's stuff, it didn't grab me. But as you start reading and doing it, you realize like how great it works in the form, and it really sets apart, and it really works great as a comic. And there's a lot of stuff in there that, I mean, it's Batman, it could be adapted, but I don't think it would ever be the same. It's one of those great comic things. The Arkham Asylum, one of the first Grant Morrison things that were out for the greater public, is, I think it's kind of funny because it's really weird. It's really weird, and the art especially is bizarre. It's like a lot of Sandman stuff. It's like a Vertigo Batman. And it plays with a lot of crazy psychological aspects behind the characters and plays with them in a lot of different ways. I don't think this one stacks up as a classic against a lot of the rest of these, but C'est la vie, interesting nonetheless. Batman the Killing Joke is technically actually an Elseworlds title, but it had such an impact and was such a powerful story, it got dragged into canon basically immediately, and is one of the most talked about things. I mean, it was just last year that there was that whole controversy about the ending and about if Batman killed Joker at the end and what that means, what the point of that is, and that's interesting. I heard a Vertigo on that back then. Hush, I mean, there was that whole community project recently. I didn't get to be in the talk. I would have liked to talk about it with people as much as I do enjoy Hush. It's a fun Batman story. But compared again to a lot of the rest of these, doesn't quite stack up necessarily quite as much because it's a good Batman story, but that's about as far as I'd throw that one. Batman and Son is actually interesting because it's the Grant Morrison Batman run, but it's probably, at least the first half of it, is probably the most square, like, superhero bizarre story, and introduces the whole Damian thing, which is shaken up the Batman universe ever since, and it's just kind of interesting there, and it's a good story, but again, once you get to the other half in the Black Glove part, it gets to this weird Batman as genre thing that I was talking about, and I don't know about that. There's Batman the Black Mirror from Snyder's initial bit, which is a fun one, and then The Court of Owls, which they lead into, which is a fun one. I think it's more noted because it was the first 52 Batman book. It's a decent one, but I personally think The Death of the Family is actually Snyder's crowning achievement thus far. But I guess this one's an easier one to bind up and put together, whatever. Honestly, Batman Earth 1 should be here. There's so many other great Batman stories that you could do that aren't this, but that's there. Then the Dark Knight Returns, one of the 86 trifecta that just rocked the comic industry. Like it or lump it, in a lot of ways this comic doesn't hold up as well as some people might think who were kind of there and part of that at the time. There's a lot of legitimate criticisms that have come to that book since, but you can't deny its importance, and you can't deny that it's really interesting and fairly... It brought back the Batman to Batman, and without that book, I don't think we'd be here today. Basically, everything else on this list, in one way or another, kind of comes from that in a way. And in a lot of ways, it was kind of like a relaunching point of Batman, which is interesting because it's more or less supposed to be the last Batman tale, except for its sequel, but no one wants to talk about that. As part of Batman Day, I bought a couple trades to be on the hype. I don't know, they were slightly discounted. I was just kind of swept up with the emotions, so I picked up Batman War Games. I'll be burning through this someday. It's not at the top of my trade pile right now, frankly, because I've been reading so much freaking Batman recently. I read a lot of earlier Batman stuff that played to like the year one thing, and I kind of wanted to put out a couple recommendations for kind of some of the aspects of Batman that I like that aren't necessarily brought up as much, and talk about the greater mythos, because I've never been as big on Batman as much as I've been about his shared universe. I think the reimagining of Catwoman in the 90s is very interesting and very relevant and plays to a lot, and the character stays more on a level than Batman does. Even Nightwing does that, especially, again, the more 90s aughts run. Blue Nightwing kind of was focused on being crime, but, I mean, cop by day, stunning superhero by night, and just crazy. And then the Robin, oh my gosh, all the different Robins really play to a lot. And it's funny that people like to separate Batman from Robin so much. When they do Batman movies, they purposely try to distance Robin, because a lot of people have a thing about Robin, colorful, and feel it makes Batman too goofy and less serious. But a huge part of what Batman is includes Robin, and that's been brought up metatextually, textually, all over. Like, Batman without Robin doesn't have the color and fun that makes it as much a superhero tale as much as kind of just a pulpy detective tale on a slant. So, I mean, like I read off earlier, I mean, within the first year of Batman comic, and that first year they played around with a lot of stuff. They were trying to find the character, basically. I mean, they had him use guns, put that away. They brought in the kid's sidekick. They played with some different villains. And I mean, all this was before they really nailed it, and they decided to really go with it in Batman 1, where they introduced the Joker. And that's when a lot of the chemistry comes. Because, like I was saying, like, as interesting as Batman can be, without the villains, he doesn't quite have the form of Batman. He's just kind of another masked Avenger, but more like the Spider, or, you know, those guys back then. So I just kind of want to briefly bring up, because a few months back I talked about wanting to get into some different Batman because I was starting to feel it a bit more, and I've read a lot of Batman the past handful of months. There's, of course, the Matt Wagner stuff, like Batman the Monster Men, where he's dealing with Hugo Strange and whatnot. And Hugo Strange is another great villain. But playing with the idea of perfection of man and whatnot, and taking place in kind of that year one space where a lot of the Batman Legends comics. And when you look at kind of the B tier of Batman books, kind of past, you know, that list I just read off, that you're grabbing Comixology. If you haven't read some of that, check it out. It's dirt cheap right now, digital, but not that cheap. But kind of the second tier is like this Matt Wagner stuff, a lot of the Batman year one stuff. But what's funny is this is kind of devoid of Robin, which is usually where I haven't liked Batman as much, but it's been speaking to me a little more. Another one, this is actually my favorite Batman story that I've read to date. Batman Year 2, Fear the Reaper, plays so much the way you think a Batman response would be, where Batman finds Joe Chill, finally the guy who killed his parents, and then he wants to take the gun that Joe Chill murdered his parents with, and he has this gun, like, hidden in, like, a shrine to the, and, like, wants to go kill him with that gun, and then kind of finds himself, and kind of in a way overcomes that and becomes more of Batman through that story. And then there's a follow-up to it, because part of that's wrapped up in that whole plot is the Reaper, because before Batman can pull the trigger and try to kill him, Batman's forced to actually work with Joe Chill to try to find this villain that's been terrorizing Gotham and terrorizing Joe Chill as well. It's a very interesting book that plays on so much of stuff you don't get to see in, like, any other Batman story. This one has always been one of my favorite Batman stories. Whatever Happened to the Cape Crusader, obviously very touching off of Grant Morrison, like, so much, but Neil Gaiman, within 2 issues, and in the back here of this trade they have a lot of Neil Gaiman's little short Batman stuff that he's done before, but playing on this idea of, like, Batman mythos, what Batman could have been, what Batman means to these different characters, what Batman's been through the eras. If you kind of want Batman as a genre in a way summed up, this book does an amazing job of it and is a really interesting take. And to the villains, there's this great bit about the Joker, Batman the Man Who Laughs, kind of talking about their first instance together, but kind of retold in a way that is more of a modern comic, more how you'd expect a Batman Joker comic to go, and it's so much darker, but it's really enjoyable for that, and playing with the whole Red Hood thing, of course. And then in the back, there's this story of heroics, and this is from the Batman era where Batman's part of the Justice League, which is the second wave of the hero age, post-Justice Society, and the Green Lantern used to be Gotham's hero. But in it, you get to see the Joker, and you see the heavy influence of The Man Who Laughs, this crazy old silent film that inspired the Joker, and they wanted to bring that back to it, and you just get this terrifying grin. And you see more of what influences and what pulls Batman together. And what's really interesting, I've actually been putting together, and this kind of just clicked. For all of the super heroics and everything, a lot of Batman is tied to circus culture. And there's a lot that ties back to the circus. A lot of his villains have those kind of crazy bits, or a lot of them are freaks, especially like in the Grant Morrison run. Like, there's midgets and like circus freak type people. There's obviously Robin to the circus. There's the idea of the clowns. There's a lot of the animals, but the animals are played in a way versus humans that kind of evoke maybe a bit of a circus theme, if less of a zoological thing. I don't know, just a lot of interesting stuff that gets pulled together, and of course there's been so much more now, but circuses used to be a bigger thing for comics in general, I think, because there's a lot more than Spider-Man as well back when. Anyways, getting off topic. One last bit, if you guys are PC gamers, if you go to greenmangaming.com, they have a lot of Batman video games, a lot of the more recent ones, obviously, for sale. They have a little code at the top. If you punch that in when you're checking out, you get them free but cheaper. But the Lego ones, the Arkham games, the Blackgate game, Injustice, and, yeah. Because Batman's kind of infiltrated the video game worlds too, on top of, having been a radio thing, a cartoon thing, a TV thing, a movie thing. As much as Batman kind of belongs to comics, he's done it all, and that's another facet, and there you go. So hope everyone had a happy Batman Day, and rock on.